number is there for you to start. And this is Erica from DCCA, and we're still just having our attendees pile in from the webinar. So if everyone sits tight, we'll be starting in just a moment. Okay. I think people are still coming in, but I think that we have a quota, so a quorum, I should say. So I'm going to turn it over to Robin to say hello and get you all started. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Erica. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the DCCA homelessness webinar series. This is our second installation. I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. My name is Robin Nunn. I'm an ANC commissioner for 2B03.
Kate Coventry. I live in the neighborhood and I work at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute.
I'm Keelan Roby, and I am a clinical outreach case manager with Miriam's Kitchen.
I'm Carrie Cunningham, a former ANC commissioner and Dupont Circle community member for about a decade now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Monica Mark. I'm the encampment coordinator with the Deputy Mayor's Office for Health and Human Services.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Davis. I'm a Deputy Administrator with DC Department of Human Services.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tawana Holland. I am with DHS, Permanent Supportive Housing Supervisor.
Fantastic. We have a lot of information to cover, so we're not going to waste even a moment with long introductions. I'm going to move first to Kate Coventry, and we can walk through and talk a little bit about some of the work and experiences that she's seen with respect to her organization. Let me just get our slide deck into slideshow mode. Here we go. Moving quickly. This video is obviously being recorded. If you have questions while our speakers are presenting, please put them in the chat for our question and answer session. If we can, we'll obviously try and answer all questions. This is an oversubscribed event, and we have a number of speakers and a lot of information that we'd like to share. So we can't promise that we'll get to every question, but we are going to take note of your questions and try and get back with responses, and feel free obviously to reach out to any of us. We're doing this event as a community service opportunity. We really love our neighbors. We really love our neighborhood, and we're excited to engage in a discussion with you all tonight. These are our pictures with our email addresses at the bottom. That's myself, that's Kate, she's about to talk. You met Jonathan and Keeleen, and we obviously have Carrie. And now let's turn to the presentation. Kate?
Sure. So I am going to talk very briefly just to set the stage for us a little bit. So you can go ahead and check out our website if you want to know what we do, or send me an email. We cover a lot of things that involve low income and moderate income residents. I particularly work on homelessness. I also work on child poverty. You can go to the next slide. So DC has something called the Interagency Council on Homelessness. I'm a voting member. The Department of Human Services is a voting member. It's the body of government officials, advocates like me, providers like Miriam's Kitchen, and people who've experienced homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness who set policy for the district. And right after the mayor was elected, the ICH put out their first strategic plan. And right now we're in the process of getting ready to release the second strategic plan using what we learned. And so just to sort of say, these are some of the principles that I thought would be interesting to this group. There's a much longer list, and that report also talks about families, whereas this presentation is really about singles. So homelessness is caused by failed systems and policy, not personal choices. There are plenty of people say, oh, but so-and-so has mental illness. Well, I know plenty of people with mental illness and they're not homeless. You know, it's a resource, it's an economic issue where people don't have the money they need to afford housing. I mean, in DC, this is particularly true. Structural racism and racial inequities should be a panel all in itself. So I'm just going to put this bullet point here and not say much more because I don't have very much time. I apologize. Housing is always the answer, always the answer. And that trauma is both a cause and consequence of homelessness. Trauma, such as like a death of a parent or a divorce, often leads someone to become homeless, but the experience of homelessness, people are more likely to be victims of crime, for example, when they're homeless, and that those sort of experiences and the instability can cause trauma. Okay, next slide. So just briefly, I know folks would probably want to know how many people are we talking about. So last year, 2020, 9,250 people touched individuals, touched the homeless services system. These are adults 18 and over who are not with a child or dependent. Of that number, 1,337 were chronically homeless. What chronic homelessness means, you've been homeless for a long time and you have a disabling condition or several disabling conditions that make it difficult for you to maintain your housing on your own. So it may be that you are in and out of the hospital, and when you are in the hospital, you don't have family support, so you need someone to make sure your rent is paid on time and that the cat gets the cat food, and that those things to maintain your housing are kept up. I know we don't have a year-round unsheltered number because people will go in and out of shelter, but on point in time, which is the one night count that we do every year, in 2020, 653 people were unhoused. But I will just say that the unhoused number really depends on the weather. One year it was so cold, they didn't want to send us out to count. And so they really worked hard to get everyone in. And there are a lot of people who will only come in when it's that dangerous. So the year-to-year count on that is not very helpful. I would say we believe there are more people unsheltered because of COVID than there have been in past years, but we just collected that data 2 weeks ago and they will not give it to us for a couple months at least, so I can't say for sure. So I just did a few graphs because I think graphs tell the whole story and I don't have to talk very much. So first point, DC has lost half of its affordable housing. In 2002, so this is all inflation adjusted, so we're talking about the same dollar amount. You used to be able to rent apartments for under $800 in the District of Columbia. I find that shocking because I don't know anyone who could get anywhere near that price these days. So part of the problem in DC is our lack of affordable housing. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Sorry, this is my technology. I warned you guys about how good
No
I am.
problem. Don't worry about it. Okay, keep going. One more. Okay, now the next one. And there just really has been no real wage growth. So most of this stuff is not talking about COVID specifically because all that data hasn't come out. But before COVID, as you can see, the prices for apartments are going up, but there's no real wage growth for DC's lowest workers. As you can see, they were making the same in 2000 as they were in 2016. Okay, next slide. And they just haven't kept pace with rising rents. Our current minimum wage is $15 an hour. Federal disability benefits are $783 a month total. You have to earn $32.83 an hour to afford fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, or if you're making the minimum wage, you have to work 77 hours per week. Next slide. And then just these two things together, right? The cost of housing, the wages not keeping up, mean more and more renters are severely cost burdened. So cost burden is paying 0 to 30% of your income in rent is your rent is affordable if you're only paying 0 to 30%. If you're paying 30 to 50%, you're cost burdened. And if you're paying more than 50%, you're severely cost burdened, which likely means that every month you barely have anything left for food or medicine or anything else you need. Next slide. And why that is important, that whole group of people who are rent burdened, they're in this blue box, right? This blue top of the triangle. These are all folks who are paying a lot in rent, are really overcrowded, are living in bad or dangerous conditions that can make people's health really terrible, right? Mold and things like that. Some of those folks every year become homeless. And when I mean homeless, I'm using the US Housing and Urban Development definition, which is you are living in a shelter or in transitional housing, or you're living in a place unfit for human habitation, like outside or in what we affectionately call abandonments. And so some people from the blue move into the dark red. And those folks, a lot of times it's just bad luck. Like maybe like before COVID, it was like bad luck. Like you got sick and you missed a shift at work and you weren't able to pick up another shift and you fell behind on your rent. But then maybe someone else at work got sick and you got to pick up their shift and then you're fine. Like the precarious, it's just very, very precarious right there. And then the triangle at the bottom, those are folks who are chronically homeless, who've been homeless for more than a year, either at one time or in several instances of homelessness. And they're folks with higher needs that more than likely will not end their homelessness without help. Next slide. And then just to say, as a budget person, our funding for affordable housing lags behind what we pay for our other priorities. So you can see how much we put in for affordable housing compared to schools, police, fire, public works. That's it.
Kate, every time you talk, I feel like I walk away learning something. That was incredible. Keeleen, can we turn over to you and all the good work that you do at Miriam's Kitchen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to highlight for y'all 2 of our programs. We have multiple and do a lot, all surrounding ending chronic homelessness in DC. So the first one is we have case management and meals. So we have a location in Foggy Bottom, which used to be a place where people could spend the day, recharge their phones, participate in art therapy, but we've moved to doing to-go meals and case management outside in the morning and afternoon. And then we also have an outreach team, which I am part of. And I specifically work in Dupont Circle in Adams Morgan, and we're there multiple times a week, checking in with folks, and then also working more intensively with people on their goals. Obviously, housing is our main goal and most of our clients' main goal. They want a safe place to live. So we do that and we work through the whole housing process with them. So there's permanent supportive housing, which I think is going to be touched on further too. But that is will match someone who's chronically homeless into housing, and they can pick often like where they want to live, and it has continued case management to make sure they are successful in their housing. And so we love that program and it has a high success rate. And so we really work to get people connected to that resource and then work through that process, which often is months and months and months. Usually it takes at least 6 months to a year when we first meet someone to get them into housing if they're eligible. So that's another barrier. There's far fewer resources than we have people. And so that is our biggest struggle. And then just the time it takes, especially during COVID, to get, it requires them to have all their vital documents before submitting the application to get their voucher for housing. So right now it takes at least 5 weeks to get a social security card. So if they do not have that, they can't even submit the application. Then often once the application is submitted to the DC Housing Authority, it can take 3 months to 8 months. I had a client recently. So it's just a very long process. And our goal is to make sure it's successful. So we work with their case managers and the client to make sure that they eventually move into housing, and also connect them with supports like mental health services, substance use services, health services, benefits like food stamps and Medicaid. And we also work, I wanted to point out 2 other great places in Dupont Circle, Charlie's Place, where they're still serving meals during the pandemic and have a clothing closet. And then also Foundry has a great ID ministry where they work with people to order birth certificates and IDs that need them. And so they've also been a great resource that we work alongside closely in that area. So Yeah, and then we also, as the outreach team, we do wellness checks and make sure people have gear, blankets and hand warmers during the winter, especially colder nights. We have a team that's out every week from 3 to 11 p.m. during hypothermia nights to check on folks and make sure that they're staying safe and seeing if they want access to shelter. So you can go to the next slide. And so this is just like an overview. We're funded by DHS. And so there's 3 teams that cover the whole city in outreach. And so we take community referrals, referrals from other agencies. And right now, like our work is pretty intense because so many services have shut down because of the pandemic or stopped in-person work with people. We have definitely seen a lack of resources that our clients can access. Even like bathrooms and libraries they used to go are no longer available to them. And so we have seen an increase in just the services that we are providing to clients because a lot of it is not accessible to them right now. So yeah, I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Keeleen. Thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of Dupont Circle. We really appreciate it. Now we are moving into Jonathan. You're up.
Thank you, Robin. And again, thanks for the invite to be present here tonight. I'm about 3 months in to DHS and also 3 months new to DC. Happy that my first community-facing event is with Dupont Circle. I absolutely love the neighborhood here. Kate mentioned earlier about the point-in-time count. The point-in-time count is a count of sheltered and unsheltered people experiencing homelessness on a single night in January. This particular count happens in DC and across all jurisdictions and cities within the USA. The data helps policymakers and communities measure progress, identify strengths and gaps in services, increase public awareness of homelessness, and enhances system planning and responses to homelessness. The slide you see before you identifies the point-in-time count from 2016 to 2019. We see that in 2016 to 17, there was a slight drop. However, we do see an increase after 2017. I think what I want people to see from this slide here is the gap in resources as it relates to what we have in our portfolio to assist people and the number of people that are actually still experiencing homelessness. So we see in 2016, including all of our services, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and targeted housing, we were only able to support about 1,200 people, but you see that the point-in-time count identified about 3,600 people who are homeless. So there's great opportunity for us to expand our resources so we can truly be good neighbors to our people who are experiencing homelessness. We plan to, as an agency, address these resource gaps by investing into our diversion programs. We're also looking at streamlining our intake process into homeless services with a robust focus on exiting people into appropriate housing. We're also investing in to the quality of our shelter facilities, making sure that people have well-appointed shelters, and also making sure that the quality of programming at our shelters are really geared to moving people through the system very well, whether it be into some voucher program or they can self-resolve housing issues on their own. We're also increasing the quality of our partnerships across government agencies and community partners so that we can make sure that we are, as a community, as a village, really supporting people who are unhoused. I will now pass it over to Ms. Holland, who will provide some additional information about services at DHS.
Hi, good evening. So I just wanted to share with you, I think you've heard a lot of information. This is just some general information with some contacts, numbers regarding our shelters and our street outreach. Oftentimes our shelter and outreach staff are out there on the streets. We have day programs, and we also have shelters where our street homeless residents can stay overnight. So these are it's just information for you to have. Currently in the Ward 2 Dupont Circle area, we have currently 18 of our families that are your neighbors and 51 individuals that are your neighbors. Some of the challenges, I've been to quite a few of these events with our outgoing chief of staff, who was Larry Handerham. Our new chief of staff is David Ross, and he's a participant today as well with you all. But some of the things that we have found that are challenges now is because of the pandemic, many people are home. And so some of the things that you would normally see during the day, you all are seeing those. And some of the things that we've talked about is, how can people be better neighbors to our homeless residents? How can we work with DHS to provide additional supports and find other resources for those other vulnerable residents. And some of the challenges that we have found is that because we are in a public emergency and many people are still teleworking, that means that you are home with your children, you want to walk your dogs, you want to take your kids to the parks, and it becomes sometimes a nuisance or just a situation where you may feel unsafe. And so we want to really work with our community to talk about some of those things and ways that we can all work together with those more vulnerable residents. One of the ways that we're doing that is our PEP-V program. Which is our pandemic emergency placement for vulnerable adults. Those are for adults that are 55 or older. We do have a link here. They can self-refer. And so they would get an assessment by Unity Healthcare. And then depending on their vulnerability, they will be put in a tier, 1, 2, or 3, and then they will be contacted if they need placement. But all of our residents have the right to shelter. And oftentimes, if you call one of the numbers on the previous slide, we can certainly assist with providing that option for that resident.
Well, I want to see all you guys' faces, so I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. We're like 20 minutes in. That was a lot of information, but I think that we should kind of have a little fun. Ms. Holland, it was obviously perfect to end on the PEP-V description. I'm hoping Bill McLeod is out in the audience, who's the executive director of Dupont Circle Main Streets. But we were talking about the PEP-V program today on our Dupont Main Streets Economic Enhancement Committee, and some of the good work that's going on at the Holiday Inn and other places in the Dupont area. But I see questions in the chat. I want to give Carrie an opportunity to chat a little. I'm hoping that we're engaging in thoughtful discussions. I see Bill just gave us a shout out and has asked a question. One of his questions was, I would love to get some people into the Holiday Inn. How can I do that? I don't know if Tawana, Jonathan, you want to take that one. And then Carrie, maybe you can take over from there with some questions maybe you've been seeing.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Tawana, do you want to, is there a way that?
So there is a link. If you put the slide that I had in the chat, they can actually just click on the link and complete that, and then they will be contacted.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to tell the truth for a minute because I'm not the government, and tell you that 550 people are waiting for PEP-V rooms right now. So if you put in your person, they may be the most vulnerable person and they'll go to the top of the list because the way the list is by vulnerability. But we need spaces for 550 more people. The federal government has said that it will pay for almost all of that. The local government has not decided to expand PEP-V. So Just want to be clear where we are. And just while I'm answering the question, one other question I can answer about the data. We use point in time for certain things and we use year-round data for other things. The Interagency Council on Homelessness just looked at a whole variety of data, and the people who actually make the housing matches look at a by name list that has details of each person that needs housing and what kind of housing they need. So we do both approaches.
And Kate, just to keep this being interactive, and Carrie, I know you have to go, but Rob Halligan has asked, is 1/3 of the Holiday Inn rooms empty? Is that true? We want to bust myths if they're out there. I don't know if we can be myth busters or on this.
So I don't have the exact numbers, but that is not true.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, excellent.
I will just tell people that we have the least number of permanent housing vouchers than we've had since the first strategic plan when the mayor took office. Some of the people in PEP V are moving into those units. So there could be there's some turnover because the person moves, they got to clean it and then figure out who the next person to come in is. So we look at that. I look at that number every 2 weeks. Even if I'm off on Friday, I am there to make sure those rooms are filled. So we need another location.
Totally agree. And to the question that, are we going to distribute the slides? We are for sure after this presentation. I couldn't get them done in time. And we're going to keep answering your questions. This is supposed to be interactive in a safe way. But I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to give a couple thoughts and, keep the questions going.
Just in terms of questions that have either come through or neighbors had reached out to me in reference to this, I think Kate tore the Band-Aid off, right? Everybody has said that they need more resources and the like. So I guess some of the questions as we're looking at budget season, the Mayor's Budget Engagement Forum, there was one this evening and the like, what do we need to do in terms of the advocacy, in terms of budget asks, and also in terms of that good neighbor piece of our individual interactions to really address the issues that we're seeing? Because as you said, Kate, what percentage during this pandemic of people who were in that housing burdened category could slide into potentially homelessness or into really dire straits because of the pandemic, particularly if the public emergency health is expired and then the eviction ban it has a 60-day expiration after the conclusion of the public health emergency.
So the eviction ban, the local eviction ban is very important, and there will be a plan coming out from the government community plan in the next 2 to 3 weeks about what we're going to do with our $200 million from the feds for emergency rental assistance. But what happens for most folks, the normal path, right, when it's not COVID, so certain things we just don't know, is people usually move in with friends or family and they double up after they're evicted. They don't come straight into homelessness. And so a lot of those situations, it's a judgment of, what's your COVID risk, right? Because if you're living in an overcrowded situation, some people may be pushed out because, they're going to work every day and they're working in a grocery store where they could get COVID. I think there are other families that are keeping people for longer than they normally would because they don't want to push them into a shelter where they might be exposed to COVID. So, we're still figuring out what the numbers are, but the eviction number, there are estimates there might be 40,000 households at risk of eviction, 40,000.
And just quickly to there's one question in the chat that I think that we should probably address, and I know Monica is dutifully responding to chats, but I feel like we should probably tear the Band-Aid off of, fairly quickly on this. Someone has asked, why are there all the encampments on 17th Street Northwest? Does anyone want to tackle that? That's sort of the topic of one of the roots of homelessness that I think we should probably discuss. Anybody, but obviously Monica, you might want to go first.
So is the question in general, why are there encampments on 17th Street or why are there encampments in the district?
It was on 17th Street. I think we're pretty Dupont Circle focused on on this one, but I think DC, the district, the world, obviously we all understand that homelessness is not unique to DC or Dupont Circle. Obviously there is an encampment on 17th and Corcoran that I think we're all, fairly familiar with. And I know there's been some recent interactions there. And I think the question is, people want to understand why it's happening. Obviously you guys are not, I don't know what the word is, fortune tellers, but do you guys, have any, being professionals and experts in this space, do you guys have any thoughts on that question?
Well, so in general, unhoused individuals are going to be rational actors, just like everybody else. And moving near a populated area where there's going to be more foot traffic, more likelihood of getting potentially panhandling money or food is going to be a rational choice. And so that could likely be a reason why they are at that location. We've noticed that an increase at our 20th and E encampment as well. And that's likely due because of the close relation to the services. As Keelan mentioned, I believe that throughout this pandemic, services have been cut, places have closed down. And so residents are looking at where are the services still open and sort of relocating to that spot. I know that 17th and Corcoran, that was there before the pandemic happened. Again, that's just likely because they can be seen closer to resources, services, likelihood of getting that panhandling money, like I said. But there's a host of reasons as well, transportation. And just in general, I think people are asking why are there more encampments right now? I wouldn't necessarily say there's more until we know what the point in time count is. I think a big thing is that a lot of folks are staying home more, and so they're seeing them more. And like I said, they're moving around to those areas that have those resources and those services, and so they're also getting more populated in specific areas.
I would just jump in and say they're the 3 Ps we talk about: pets, possessions, and partners. In the district, our individual shelters are segregated by gender. So if you are with someone of the other gender, and this can be, adult siblings, these romantic couples, etc., you cannot be in the same shelter other than one shelter where there's a women's section and a men's section. So you could be together that way. Possessions, people have a lot of stuff, and it is a struggle to know what to do with it. And I will just say, I don't know any jurisdictions that have figured it out. I've spent a lot of time, and I know the government, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, and Seattle's like, we ruined it. So that it seems simple and it's not. And then pets, and people have lost a lot, and their pet might be all that they have, and we don't yet, although before COVID we were exploring pet friendly shelter. I'll also just say COVID, some people are staying outside because of COVID, and that I will say the district has made really good progress on some of our shelters, but previous to that repair, no one I knew who worked in homeless services would stay in one of our shelters. So we are now renovating. There's going to be a new 801 East Men's shelter. There's a new women's shelter. So some of the facilities are really nice and really great, and then some are just in line to be fixed. And so some people have had that experience of a less safe feeling and a less clean feeling shelter than, say, the ones that have already been repaired.
A
We've got
follow-up.
some questions related to housing and the comprehensive plan and how to advocate. I mean, as you look at the housing issues that we face as a city, what are some of the potential levers or strategies we can use to try to bring more people out of this conundrum that they're facing, whether it be being severely rent burdened and or experiencing homelessness, because we don't have the proper resources at present to meet the demand? So what, from an advocacy perspective, would you say that one should do?
And
That's on me to figure out. And I'll just say there are layers of things that I understand and don't work on, and don't really understand and don't work on. So I don't really work on the comprehensive plan. I will say that, supply more housing helps, right? Because, what happens, you can see sort of, the gentrification of the city moves eastward as folks can't afford to live in Dupont, so they move to Shaw. They can't move into Shaw, they move to Bloomingdale. You can't move into Bloomingdale, you move into Edgewood and all of that. And I was part of that. I mean, I lived in Bloomingdale, and then I wouldn't have been able to afford to live there 2 years after I moved in. It was only because I lived in had kind of a rent control situation that I was able to stay. I'll say that housing is expensive. And so for the lowest income folks, the folks we're seeing or staying on the street, they need permanent supportive housing most likely. And that is housing plus services. Meets people where they are, and it helps them achieve their goals. And sometimes the goal is like, I want to be better my physical health's been bad, and so I'm going to get my physical health together. For some people it's getting back to work. For some people it's, reunifying with friends or family. So it's a program that can really adjust to a lot of things, and we do a good job, and we have a lot of quality providers. And I can say that because I don't do any of this service provision, but we don't get enough vouchers every year. And so there are people who are just homeless for years because they're not vulnerable enough to get to the front of the line.
And Jonathan, would you agree? One of the questions is, why aren't we helping the people in the 17th Street encampment to get housing? It's growing. Are the statistics, Keeleen, are you guys seeing with your cases that the situation is getting better or worse?
I mean, I would say, people are matched to housing and it takes months. So, I mean, there's situations where we are working with them, but just because the process is just so intensive and bureaucratic, it can take, I mean, we're almost hit a year with working with a client. And that's nothing from the client's end has been really willing to work with us and does everything they need to do. So I would say that's a big issue. And then also there's just people that like Kate said, aren't vulnerable enough. So they're vulnerable, but it's just you sometimes, to get expedited housing, you literally have to have cancer or literally dying. And so that's a huge issue. We see as just a lack of resources. It's not because people aren't out there talking to them about housing, and it's not because they don't want housing. It is just, we don't know what resource to connect them to because there isn't any.
Yeah, Robin, and I should also add that we are also looking at the voucher approval process to see how we can better streamline those processes so that we can get people into housing quicker.
And along those lines, Jonathan, do you know who is responsible? I mean, not that anyone solely is, responsible, but there seems to be a lack of vouchers for permanent supportive housing.
So DHS and Department of, DCCA are working very closely, working very well together these days to make sure that we expedite
He's not
vouchers.
allowed to talk about the budget, really. So I'm just going to tell you, the mayor and the council didn't put in more money. That was the issue. They put in more money in previous years. More people got housing. This year, it was a tight budget. And people work for the government aren't supposed to talk about how tight the budget is. So I'll just tell you, it was the worst budget in 5 years. And then that meant fewer people can move into housing.
And how much does it cost to?
It's about $28,000 annually. And that's rent plus services for a single person.
Okay.
For some of those folks, just to be clear, someone's visiting you practically every day, right? It can be a very intense service model, and then people get more stable and they don't just have as much services, so that's an average.
And Carrie, this question was directed to Kate in the chats, but maybe you might want to tackle it. It mentions that Reggie Black informed the group that there are 10,000 vacant housing units in the district. Many of them were financed by taxpayers at 47 million costs. Many of them were supposedly financed through tax increment financing. What do you think about requiring the developers who come to places like Dupont Circle, who are sitting on these vacant units, and requiring those developers to offer those units to the homeless?
I mean, I'm no finance expert. I'm a community member above all else. But, I do think that part of the conversation has to be, in an area like Dupont Circle, Kate had a slide, 0.3% of housing in Dupont Circle is affordable housing. And if it would be a desirable goal for our community to have more mixed income housing, then we would have to talk about what are those levers. Is that a trade-off with increased density and high traffic corridors like Connecticut Avenue with office vacancy rates likely to increase? That's a conversation I think the community could have to do that. I don't know the specifics of what the I mean, I haven't looked at the specifics of tax increment financing, what those projects were slated to do, if they were specific to housing or what they were proposing to do. So I couldn't really, I'm not a budget person capable of speaking of that. But I do think there's a conversation, because Kate has alluded to the fact that you need a more supply, is what she seemed to be saying. And so that is a conversation of density, which is a challenging one. And it's a challenging one in a historic district as well, because living in a historic district typically makes it more expensive for an individual property owner or a developer to come in and, modify the physical structure. Not that there isn't value in a historic property, but I'm just saying statistics will show you it is more expensive for average JQ homeowner or others to renovate their property, upgrade it, or alter it in a historic district. So I think those are some economic realities. And I think it would be helpful probably to have somebody who is well-versed in the finances of development to talk to us about that, because I think, the reality is it's more expensive to build in Ward 2 than it is in other sectors of the city. I don't think it's an excuse for us not to try to make it a goal to be part of the mayor's goals in achieving affordable housing and doing our fair share. But I think we have to be grounded in those economic realities, and Brookings and other institutions have really started to do a really good job about doing some of that analysis.
I think another another topic around the housing availability is a lot of the places that clients want to live are not rent reasonable. And developers and property owners, they have the right to charge what they want. And if they don't want to come down to the rent reasonable rate, a lot of the more vulnerable residents are not able to have those. And because the residents have choice, many of the available units that are east of the river in Ward 7 and 8, they don't always want to pick those, because they have often had trauma and with their families or friends, and they don't want to live there. They want to live in these areas, and unfortunately the availability is not always there.
I just say too that there are people who are completely bad actors, and the rent is within the reasonableness, but they will charge holding fees to hold the unit, and amenity fees, and trash fees, and fees and fees and fees and fees, and vouchers don't cover those fees. And every time we try to legislate, they just come up with a new kind of fee. I'm not a lawyer, but that's the part I know of. And then someone asked how many individuals are waiting for permanent supportive housing. Probably 2,000. It's not a wait list. It's a dynamic list of like who's the most vulnerable at any time, but over 2,000.
Wow. I mean, part of this is obviously we're heading to our last 15 minutes is talking about solutions, and as neighbors, how we can sort of, help. I think we've done a really great job, or you guys have done a great job of walking us through the realities of homelessness, especially in Dupont Circle specifically. Any thoughts in terms of what we can do as community members, as ANC members, as good neighbors, to sort of move the needle in these areas?
One of the things I would say is just continue to advocate, but as neighbors, get to know your neighbors. Every one of those faces has a story. Offer a bed, offer a blanket, offer a pair of socks, offer a meal, and get to know people, because there are stories, very tragic stories, that have come behind every one of those faces. And they are just like you or I, and many of us are one paycheck or two paychecks away from exactly where they are. And so they want to be safe from COVID, and they want to be respected, and they have goals and dreams as well. And so I would just say, get to know folks and see what they want. They may have a family member that lives in Texas that they just need to get to. And that's something that, if they went to one of our service centers, we could assist with that. So not everyone, but I would just say get to know your neighbors, your more vulnerable neighbors.
Robin, did we provide on one of the slides our shelter hotline
Ooh, that's a good
number?
question. I don't know if we did, but I'm sure we can put it in the chat.
It's in
Yes.
our,
It's a,
Yeah.
okay, slide. Okay, everyone is going to get the slides. If Mo sees it, please add it to the chat. But that's a great idea, Jonathan.
You can also call 311. 311 will put you right up to the shelter hotline. Want to flag something for folks. Sometimes people don't want to come in and they have very good reasons for not wanting to come in, but you can call and someone will come and check on them and make sure they have a blanket or soup or whatever. The van has a lot of stuff for people, so it can help to come around. Read street sense. And talk to street sense vendors. I think that's a good way to build relationships. I'll just say folks are lonely because like I go to Foundry United Methodist and there are folks that are at our church, right, who stay there, but our church folks are not there. We are remote, so we don't see them. So I think there's a big gap during COVID of people not really having the same kind of routine that they normally have. Everyone always needs socks, and I would say masks and hand sanitizer.
So I guess this is a question related to that, because we walk away from this and then we're like, what do we do? Right. And yes, there's the individual piece. Like if we wanted to coordinate that as a community, can we work through like Miriam's to do that? Who are our best partners for that? Because I think this is really about building connections, whether it be government connections, whether it be the provider connections, whether it be the advocate connections that we have to really work on the advocacy front, the budget front, and then the day-to-day piece to try to address this. I mean, would that be something, Keelan, that the community could do, partner with Miriam's and because it breaks down with the distribution usually.
Right. Yeah. And so we have volunteers from the community that come help serve meals. And it's a great way to like get to know the population. We also accept financial donations and in-kind donations, which has changed a little bit because of the pandemic. We're not taking as much clothing just because we're trying to limit the amount of volunteers coming into our building. So those are big ways. I would recommend also Charlie's Place takes clothing donations, and that is on Connecticut Avenue, just, a short walk from the actual park. And they take clothing and they also serve meals. So it's a great way to directly impact your community. But I think through advocacy and who you vote for and paying attention to is homelessness something they're working to end, and that if you're truly going to put a dent in the people who are experiencing homelessness, more housing is needed. Like blankets are great, and I think that people out on the street should be well taken care of, but it doesn't usually lead to lasting change. So I would say that's a huge way to individually impact your community.
So the best way on the budget, so DCFPI is a resource on all kinds of things, budget, how things work, the votes, who does what, mayor, council, but the Way Home campaign, which is staffed by Miriam's Kitchen, that is solely focused on individuals experiencing homelessness, mostly on folks experiencing chronic homelessness. So if you sign up, you could probably get an email once a week during budget, and it might say like, hey, will you tweet it at council member Pinto and say, I live in Dupont Circle and this is important to me, or will you send an email? Or will you make a 5-minute call to the mayor? You don't talk to the mayor, you talk to your staffer and you just say, hey, I really think this is an important thing for the budget. So if you really, really want to focus on homelessness, the Way Home, just follow them and you'll have everything. If you need other things, DCFPI is there. I'm here to be your budget resource. You can email me too.
And from DHS perspective, how do we make that a positive, a positive interaction, continuing on? Interaction, I think, because I think, the community is very concerned. And I think we need to be proactive and we need to figure out how to be solutions oriented where we can be. So what insights do you have in terms of communities engagement that's helpful or productive?
Yeah, so I think tonight is, an example of that, continue to have, conversation series about the issue. If there are task forces that are geared to address particular issues, invite us to those task force meetings. Invitation and conversation and relationship building between DHS and the community, I really think is the platform that we need to really solve these very difficult solutions. We need to know that homelessness will not be resolved overnight, but we definitely can work together in a safe space to do so.
Monica, anything that you want to add? I know we're down to our last 10 minutes. I don't want anyone to leave anything on the table. It's incredible. I'd have to say that I sent out, one email asking folks if they'd be interested, and every single person on this panel jumped in immediately, answering the call from their very, very busy schedules of running around the community helping people, because they did so much want to engage and talk with the Dupont Circle community. And it's great that we answered the call and made this a sold out event. But I realize that we're down to our last 9 minutes. So I want to give everyone a chance to say, anything that they feel like they might have missed. So Monica, is there in closing, anything that you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, so hopefully my microphone is a little bit better right now. Okay, good. Sorry about that earlier. So I would love to know, Carrie, what are you looking for in terms of community engagement? Are you looking for more resource events? Are you seeing that there's a gap in specific services being provided? What are you seeing that we're not seeing that we can partner together? Another thing is what landlords are in Dupont that are sympathetic to this cause? Are they willing to partner with us? And as Kate said, willing to get rid of all of those fees that are kind of the barrier. And so, I am very willing to work with the community. I like resource events. I love bringing in new partners. But I'm also a very realistic person. And so I want to make sure that the goals and ideas that we have aren't too big, that we can't ever achieve them, but how can we start small and then work our way up?
Right. I mean, I know when I was the commissioner, I had, I had to walk with several of my constituents who are interested in providing units through like the HALO program or other programs. And that was a very challenging process. I think information around that in terms of how we can be part of the solution in our community and do our part, I think is something that could be really helpful in terms of looking at housing opportunities in Ward 2. I do think it's landlords partnering and figuring out how that is. I think there's also, I think it would be helpful to get more specificity around sort of who's coming to Dupont, like how regularly is that happening? Because I think there is a perception among some community members, and we've never been able to like nail it down, to be honest. And it's been frustrating for some community members when you go out on the other side of it as a commissioner and say, well, they're coming to do services, we've asked them, but like how many FTE do we have? How many people are out doing outreach on a regular? How many touch points are really happening with that? Because in the absence of things moving along, the average Joe Q public or Joanne public doesn't really see that.
Yeah.
They just think that that person is still there on the corner and it's not being addressed. And that's public perception. Mm-hmm. So I think sort of saying where are the resources around that in terms of what are we doing on the ground specifically to support the individuals is really helpful from your perspective. And I think that's married with then the piece that's been talked about the advocacy front. Mm-hmm. Because they both are integral parts of the system, mm-hmm. to be honest. And we appreciate what you do on the government side, and I also appreciate what the advocates do as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And Monica, do you want to respond, and then we should probably start, rolling around.
Yeah. So briefly, we have DMHHS has 2 outreach workers, and they visit all active encampments. They try to go every week, but if not every week, they make sure they touch them every other week. And so we keep a daily log of all the sites we visited every day. And I know that Dupont is one of them that they go at least once a week. I imagine that Keelan's team goes at least once a week, if not more. And then we have DHS and DBH. And so I imagine with all of those partners, we have somebody touching DuPont area at least once a week. At least once every day, Monday through Friday. And as Keelan mentioned, they do have those evening shifts as well. And so if we don't catch folks during the day, we have outreach workers out at night as well. But I completely agree with you. The perception is that we're not there, or it's negative, or they're, because the housing process is so long, they're not seeing movement. And so I completely agree with you that changing the perception is great, and I'd love to be a part of that. I don't know how much specificity we can provide given, client privacy and stuff like that. And so I'm very open to discussing it and seeing, where we can work together and kind of change that view.
And Monica, obviously, we all know you jumped on this call very last minute because you wanted to be here. So your efforts in the DuPont area and beyond are much appreciated.
And I think, Robin, I'm going to say this just because it's been iterated by people in the chat and sort of has been on listservs. And this is a conversation I think that needs to happen probably at a different time, but just raise the issue of public safety and that perception among some of the folks in the community. And how to get through some of those, how to work through some of the perceptions that people have in terms of public safety.
If we're going to touch on that, we're obviously going to have to then circle back to Kate's points on racism and discrimination and bias. So we're not going to end on that note. But I don't know. We have like 2 more minutes, and I don't know if folks, Keeleen, Jonathan. I want to make sure that you guys have, a moment, Tawana, Kate, to say thanks or anything that you felt like you didn't get a chance to talk about.
The only thing is that DC has done a great job at investing on the family side for folks experiencing homelessness. We are now looking at how do we make meaningful and purposeful investments on the single side for people experiencing homelessness. So I just say stay tuned for some of the great work that is ahead of us, and we're looking forward to a continued partnership with Dupont Circle to really be good neighbors to folks who are unhoused.
Thanks, Jonathan. Tawana?
And just one thing I wanted to say, we work very closely, DHS works very closely with DHCD, that's Department of Housing and Community Development, to really look at developers expanding what they have to give them incentives to do more broad housing across all wards in the District of Columbia. So if any of your residents and constituents know people who are landlords or property developers, please tell them to contact DHCD, because we partner with them, and that's what we're looking for. We are looking for more housing for our residents.
Perfect. Keeleen, Kate?
Get involved in the budget. 5 people who are homeless have died in the past 10 days. Homelessness kills people, and we can save their lives by providing housing and services.
Thanks, Kate. So powerful. Keeleen?
Yeah, and I would just say that Dupont Circle has a wonderful community, and I think that is a reason why a lot of people choose to be there. And I've heard that from people who are experiencing homelessness there, that they have gotten to know their community members as well. And so to go back to the question of why people pick there, I think that plays a role as well.
Fantastic. Well, this was a really, really, really fun panel. I really enjoyed working with all of you, and all of your dedication to the community and making the world a better place is really inspiring. I wanted to say thanks to Mo Pasternak, who is obviously on the screen and has been answering all the chats. He is my co-commissioner and couldn't do what we do without him. He's very understated, and that's why he has not said very much, but he's working hard behind the scenes to fight homelessness, just like the rest of the ANC2B. Thank you to all my panelists. I want to turn it over to our fearless leader, Nick Manning, who obviously runs our DCCA homelessness committee and has made all of this possible. Another understated individual who went out with me and Kate Coventry and did the homelessness watch and our count together, and a great neighbor to close this out. But thank you guys all so much, and thank you to the audience. Nick, over to you.
Well, thanks, Robin, and thanks to you all. I mean, it's been a tremendous panel, and I mean, I've learned the most enormous amount. So thanks very much indeed, and thanks also to the 100 people or so who registered for this event. So I mean, it's been a really tremendous turnout. I should also just very quickly just note that behind the DCCA logo, at one point or other on your screen, is Erica Rickle, and she has been putting together all the techniques for this. So Erica, thanks very much indeed. And also thank the DCCA Homelessness Committee, who have done a lot of work in planning for these events. I want to be very brief and just to note that this is the second in a 6-session series, and the starting point of the series is that we don't know the best way forward, but we do know that what's happening right now is either not optimal or not enough, or likely both. Just think about the gap that Jonathan showed us in one of his charts, the gap between the numbers of people in need and the resources available. It's not all about money, but resources are a binding constraint. Now, our idea in putting on this series, it's been to provide information and informed views so that we're all in a better position to make our own decisions about how best to help, how best to campaign for change. And let's be clear, DC has achieved a lot in addressing family homelessness. That's tremendous. But DC's level of homelessness for single people is a shameful failure in civic governance, and it's an obvious tragedy. There's just simply no question about that, right? We're all frustrated and horrified by it. What we want a community that's frustrated productively and horrified with a purpose. We want it to be engaged and activist, lobbying and taking action on the basis of facts. And we hope this series is contributing towards that. I just want to very quickly run through where we're at in the series. So this has been the second event. Last week, we kicked off by looking at what additional difficulties, what further trauma COVID-19 has added to the lives of people experiencing homelessness. Then tonight, thank you very much indeed, panel, for this discussion and this review of some of the roots of homelessness and the arithmetic of the need for affordable housing. On March the 4th, the next session, we're going to talk about the psychological challenges and substance abuse, and cause and effect is a real conundrum here. And I think Kate mentioned earlier on, Kate mentioned earlier on that, we all know a lot of people have got mental health problems, but they're not necessarily homeless. There are other things. Don't let's equate the two. Don't just assume that they automatically go together. On March the 11th, we're going to look at the importance of permanent supportive housing in moving people from sidewalks to safe homes where they can rebuild their lives. On March the 18th, we're going to look at policy in DC and whether recent approaches have really been successful. And one particular question that we want to address then is when politicians throw numbers around, we've spent X million dollars on this and a further Y million dollars on that. How should we think about that? What's the scale and effectiveness of that sort of spending? And then we're going to conclude on March the 25th by hearing the experiences of LGBTQ youth and of women who've experienced homelessness and looking at the very particular challenges they face. So to emphasize what we're doing in this series, we want to sort of provide just a basic platform of facts, a foundation of things, just some understanding about what's going on, so that at the end of the day, we can be not just frustrated, but frustrated productively, and not just horrified, but horrified with a purpose. So again, thank you all very much. And Robin, thank you so much for putting this together tonight. Thanks a million.